Sachas Nazir Daf Yud Aleph contains 3 Mishnayos, all continuing the halachos of Kabbalas Naziris, which was made in an unclassic manner, and when it works and when it does not work. So we begin the Daf with our first Mishnah. The Mishnah says if they pour a cup of wine for somebody and he says, I am a Nazir from this wine. So this is different than classic Nazirs because he's not saying he's a Nazir from all wine, just from this wine. So the halacha is that he is a Nazir. And then the Mishnah brings the story. There was a lady who was drunk, and they poured a cup of wine, and she said, I'm a Nazir from it. The Chachamim said she's only a Nazir from that cup of wine, because she wasn't saying she's a Nazir. She's just saying that she's making a neder, asering that cup of wine on her like a carbon. So the Gemara asks right away that the story contradicts the halacha. The halacha was that such a Kabbalas Naziris works, and the story was that it doesn't work, it's only that it's a neder. So Gemara explains that there's a phrase or a case missing in the Mishnah, and you have to read it as follows. Generally, if you pour a cup of wine for somebody and he says, I'm a Nazir from it, then he is a Nazir. You assume that he meant Naziris from all wine. However, if he was a drunk, then he's not a Nazir. And the reason is that he's assuming that if he makes himself a neder asering that cup of wine, then he's going to get brought another cup of wine. These people are trying to antagonize him by bringing him many cups of wine to drink, that he should get drunker. But he really wants to aser only this cup of wine. He just wants to get the people to stop. The phrase that he used is that he's a Nazir in order that they should stop bringing him any cup of wine. But his real intent was only to aser this cup of wine. And then the Mishnah brings the story from the lady that did that in Chacham and Paskin, that it's a neder, and it only asers on this cup of wine because she was a drunk. And therefore that proves the missing halacha in the Mishnah. We now begin our next Mishnah, which discusses 3 cases when someone tried to make a partial Nazirus and what the halacha is. So the first case is where he says, I'm going to be a Nazir, Harini Nazir, but I want to continue being able to drink wine and become Tameh, meaning he only wants to be a Nazir as far as the halachas of hair cutting. So the halacha is that it's Chal full Nazirus, and he is usher in all the items, even the ones that he wanted to exclude. Second case is where he says, I'm a full Nazir, but then at the same time he says, and I know that a Nazir is usher to cut hair and to become Tameh, but I didn't know this, that a Nazir is usher to drink wine. So that I never really intended to usher wine on myself. So here you have a machlokes. Tanakama says it's a full Nazirus, and he's usher even on wine. Rabbi Shimon says it's no Nazirus, and he's mutter on everything. This is Rabbi Shimon's opinion, which we had early in the Masechta and Daf Gimel, where Rabbi Shimon holds that if he starts spelling things out, then he has to spell them all out. Otherwise, the Nazirus doesn't count. So here he spelled out haircut and tuma, and he didn't spell out wine. So the neder Nazirus is not chal. And the third case is where he says he makes a Isser Naziris, he makes himself into a Nazir, says Harini Nazir, and says, I know that all the halachos, but I thought, and this he says at the time of the Naziris, he says, I thought that the Chachamim will take the Isser wine off me because I'm a type of person who needs wine. I can't survive without wine. Or he says, I thought they'll take the Isser to be Metame off me because my Parnasa is from burying the dead, so I have to be Metame. Now, of course, the Chachamim aren't going to take that off because it's not within their power, and this person says it's a mistake. So here you have what appears to be the reverse of the previous shitas. Here the Chachamim say it's mutter and there's no Naziris, and Shimon says there is a full Naziris. The Gemara now begins. The Gemara's first question is, why does Reb Shimon not argue on the first case in the Mishnah? First case in the Mishnah where he says, I'm a Nazir on the condition that I'm able to still drink wine and be metame to Mesim. Now, Reb Shimon we saw holds that anyone who makes a Naziris partially is not a Naziris at all. So Reb Shimon should hold that this is not a Naziris at all. Why doesn't he argue on the Chachamim who say that he has a full Naziris? So Gemara gives 2 answers. The Gemara's first answer is that Rabbi Shuben Levi says he does argue on it. Reb Shimon would disagree on that and say there's no Naziris there at all. However, Ravina gives an explanation. Ravina says, because what he's trying to do is make a Tanai against the Torah. He says he wants to be a Nazir, but the Tanai is that he should be mutter to drink wine and be metame to mace. The Torah says not. So it's a Tanai against the Torah. Such a Tanai is automatically canceled. It's like he didn't say anything. And therefore we just ignore those words, and all we have left with is, as he says, that he is a Nazir. So Shimon agrees. Somebody just says he's a Nazir, he doesn't have to spell anything out. It's only if he starts listing things that he has to list everything. But this is a full Naziris. Now, Shimon Levi didn't want to say this pshat, the Gemara says, because he doesn't understand this as being a Tanai against the Torah. The guy didn't say, I want to be a Nazir and I make a Tanai against the Torah. He just said, I want to do a partial Naziris. I want to be be makabel the Nazirus of haircutting and not the other two. And that is not masna mashachos b'Torah. It's a partial Nazirus, and that Rosh Shimon argues. Okay, that's the machlekes. The Gemara quotes a brayso which spells out like Ravina. The brayso says, if somebody says, I am a Nazir on condition that I'm able to drink wine or be a metame to mesim, he's a Nazir in all halachos because he's making a tanai against what the Torah does, and anybody who makes a tanai against what the Torah says, the tanai is cancelled. Okay, next, the Gemara wants to know why the halachos are switched in the second case and the third case. In the second case, he made a partial Nazirus. The Rabbanan said it's chal, and Shimon said it's not chal. In the third case, he seemed to also have made a partial Nazirus. The only difference there was he said, I knew that I was becoming a Nazir in Yayin, but I thought the Chacham would matter it for me. So again, he wants to make a partial Nazirus. Here, the Chacham says it's not chal, and Shimon says it is chal. Why is it reversed? So the Gemara will give three approaches. The Gemara's first approach is to say that it's a mistake, switch it back. And really, in both cases, the Chachamim say that it is chal, and Hashem says it's not chal. The Gemara's second teretz is that there's a difference here. In the first case, he was trying to create a partial Nazirus. The Chachamim held a partial Nazirus that you create is a full Nazirus. Reb Shimon held a partial Nazirus you create is not a full Nazirus. In the second case, he made the Nazirus. He was makabel of regular Nazirus. Then he wants to try to take it off. He says, I thought I could get out of it. I thought the Chachamim would allow me to drink wine. They're not allowing me. So I want to take off. I want to be matir neder Nazirus on the drinking wine part of the Nazirus. So he wants to be matir a partial Nazirus. Now, the Rabbanon held that a heter of a partial Nazirus works. Just like they held that a Kabbalah's partial Nazirus works, a heter partial Nazirus works. But it takes off the full Nazirus. And therefore this person has no Nazirus anymore. Reb Shimon holds, just like he holds that a Kabbalah's Nazirus, which is partial, doesn't work, a heter partial Nazirus is useless. So therefore he's still stuck with a full Nazirus. And that's why he still has his full Nazirus. The Gemara now gives a third answer, and this is that this third case, the machlekes, is a totally different machlekes. It's a case of somebody makes a neder based on a tanai, and he plans on not fulfilling the tanai, so the neder shouldn't be mekuyim and shouldn't be chal. But then an oinus happens, and he can't, and he's blocked. And the question is, in a case like that, do we say that the neder is chal, we don't care that he had an oinus, or do we say that the neder is not chal, if he had an oinus, it's not his fault? That's a machlekes Rabbi Yosi and Shmuel. That's machlekes Rav Asi and Shmuel, which the Gemara is going to bring soon. And this machlekes is based on the same machlekes. Chachamim take one position on the neder b'oinus, and Reb Shimon takes the other position. So first of all, let's examine the machlekes Rav Asi and Shmuel. So it's based on a Mishnah which we learned in Maseches Nedarim, Daf Chaf. The Mishnah over there lists four types of Nazirus, four types of Nedarim that don't count. Nidre is a ruzin, is where two people are bargaining over a sale price for an item, and one says, I'm gonna aser this item if I go higher, and the other one says I'm gonna aser your money if I go lower. And they don't really mean it, they're just trying to emphatically win the bargaining. Second one is if it's a clear exaggeration. The third one is if it's based on a mistake. And the third one is if it's an einus. And that's our case that we're going to focus on. He makes a neder based on a certain tanai, which he plans on not being mekayim or being mekayim, and an einus happens and prevents him from the plan. So now, the Gemara quotes of Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav Asi that you do need to be shoyel on all these nedarim. They're not canceled automatically. You have to take them off. And Rav Yehuda quotes Shmuel, who says that you don't have to take these nedarim off. They're fully canceled. And therefore you have a machlokes here about nidrei ointzin. Are they chal and they need to be canceled, or are they not chal and don't need to be canceled at all? Says the Gemara, therefore, that is our case here. Our case is where he says he made a full Kabbalah's Nazirus, but it was based on a Tanai, that he'd be able to get out of the drinking of the wine. And then what happened was that an Einus happened, and he has to drink wine, or he has to bury the dead. He has no way out of it. So now the question is, this is a neder of Nazirus, which is now intervened by an Einus. So what should he do now? So the Rabbanon hold like Shmuel that nidrei eintzin don't count at all, and therefore there's no neder here. Rav Shimon holds like Rav Asi, the nidrei eintzin do count, and therefore there is a neder Nazirus here. We now begin the next Mishnah, which discusses somebody who makes a Nazirus and then adds an additional chiyuv. So he says, Hareini Nazir, I am a Nazir, and then he says, V'olai legaleach Nazir, and I am accepting by myself to shave a Nazir, which means to bring the karbanos that a Nazir is chayev at the end of his Naziris. Now he has to bring two sets of karbanos. First, he has to bring his own karbanos when he finishes his own Naziris, which he was chayev as soon as he said Hareini Nazir. And then he said he wants to bring more karbanos of a Nazir, so he has to bring those as well. Now, if another person heard him, and that person said, Va'ani ve'olai, he said, I also, and on me also, which means, the Gemara will explain this at length, but he said, I also am a Nazir, and I also want to be Makabel, the karbanos of Naziris. So, the Mishnah says they both have to bring karbanos, besides for their own Naziris. Now, they could bring karbanos for someone else. So if they're smart and they want to save money, they'll bring karbanos for each other. That means each one will bring as his nadava karbanos, besides for his own naziris, he'll bring karbanos that'll be for the other person's naziris, and then together they will only bring two sets of karbanos between the two of them. If however they're not so smart, they'll go and they'll bring karbanos for someone else, and they'll each end up bringing two for a grand total of 4 between them. Now the Gemara focuses on the one who said va'ani. The Gemara asks, when somebody hears someone else say two things, and then he adds and me, so is that referring to one of the things he said or both of the things he said? And if you tell me it refers to only one, is referring to the first thing or the second thing. So the Gemara wants to say, you prove from our Mishnah that it refers to only one of the two and it refers to the first one. Why? Because this guy who heard the first person say Hareini Nazir and I'm going to bring karbanas, he said Va'ani and Ve'olai, I am, and he added, and it's also upon me to bring a karbanos. Obviously, when he just said va'ani, it did not include the entire two things. It only included the first one, which was that he was makabel naziris, and that's why he had to add ve'olai. So Gemara asks, maybe not. Rav Huna Breda Rav Yeshua says the first proof was brought by Rava. Rav Huna Breda Rav Yeshua says no, maybe not. Maybe he didn't have to say ve'olai at all. Once he said va'ani, it's makabel both things. V'olai is just he happened to say extra. People could talk extra; they don't have to. Just because that's what he said doesn't prove that he had to say it. And now says Rav Huna Breda Rav Yeshua, I can't just say that stam. I'll prove it to you because in the next Mishnah coming up on the next daf, he says he hears his friend say a lie to shave a nazir, meaning to bring a karbanos, and he says va'ani alai legalech chatzi nazir. They each say, the first one says it's on me to shave half a nazir, to bring half the karbanos of naziris, and then he says, and it's on me to bring half the karbanos of naziris. Now why does he have to spell that out? Why does he have to say a lie? Over there was only one thing that the first guy said. So the first guy said something, he could just say va'ani. Why do you have to add va'alai? Obviously, he's saying it even though he didn't have to. So great. So you see, the Mishnah will add in that he said something even though he didn't have to. Says Rava, no. It could be that there the Mishnah added it in because he added it in this Mishnah. Since stylistically we had to say it in this Mishnah, because otherwise he would only have been makabel one of the two things. Once we said it here, we said it there. But you can't say, if it wouldn't say it here, so it's highly probable, though, that if it wouldn't say it in our Mishnah, then we wouldn't say it in the second Mishnah. Because in the second Mishnah, you don't have to say it. In the first Mishnah, you have to say it. But once it was said in the first, you say it in the second.